Ladies and gentlemen, I am experiencing some technical difficulties, but don't mind me. We have a phenomenal night in front of us once again. I'd like to welcome all of you and Chief Rabbi Funay, who's been with us through thick or thin for 2 years now. This month marks 2 years of Diversity United. Pretty amazing. So I thank everyone for your interest and support throughout. Nice to see Dr. Edwards and, of course, President and Rabbi Shlomo Ben Levi, who is going to address us again as an encore to his presentation in January. So take it away, Rabbi Shlomo Ben Levi.
Thank you, Eric, and thank all of you for coming this evening. You know, when I began thinking about this session, I wanted to talk about how we could restart the Black Jewish Alliance by addressing what the problems are, what has been dividing us, particularly in recent years. And I'm very encouraged by the success of our last forum in which we talked about perceptions about Black anti-Semitism. And we did that in a very intelligent and calm way. And this is the beginnings, I think, of how to heal conflicts within a community, and the way we were able to discuss it. And for those of you who were or were not part of that, we talked about everything from Kanye West to Kyrie Irving to Louis Farrakhan, and really aired what people from both groups are thinking and feeling. And I think a lot of that was new. It was open and it was honest. And at the end, there was no blood on the floor. So, so the next part is to see if we can keep this conversation going. And I think what we're doing here is not only healthy for us, but providing an example of what I hope could be happening around the country, where particularly Blacks and Jews, I happen to be both, and a lot of people on this call are both, but and I'm happy if we can be a bridge between these two communities, because we are part of both and we understand and empathize with both in that way. And so we're happy to facilitate this, but I'm hoping that what we're doing here could be a role model for what communities could be doing across the country. When I spoke to Eric about this, the fact that we're small is a good thing, because it means that any group, even one as small as we are, can do it. If we were a large, well-financed group, then other communities would say, we don't have the people, we don't have the resources, we don't have the space. But we're showing that it doesn't take much. It takes a few committed people. It takes people willing to come together and honestly discuss different points of view and be willing to listen and to learn. And so I'm hoping that this will be an example and carry through all around the country. I also want to, if I have control of the screen.
2 seconds.
Okay, I think I do. I want to take a moment by way of introduction of what we're doing now to show the good things that we're doing. Can you see the website that I have up here now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the blackjews.org website, the official website of our organization. And I'm showing to you now to show you what you may not have heard or seen if you weren't fortunate enough 2 weeks ago to be with us at Ahava Shalom. Here is an article and video, which I'm not going to show tonight, but if you want to see this, of where we packed the synagogue, Black and white Jews together, worshiping, praying, and celebrating our diversity within the Jewish community. Ahava Shalom took the lead during Black History Month to recognize that there are Black Jews in our midst and in our community, and that they're welcome to worship with us, and invited us, and congregations from all over New York, from Philadelphia, from Atlanta, from Chicago, came and we worshiped together. Maybe you didn't
And-
hear about that, but if
And worship did we do, Rabbi?
yes, it was a
Awesome,
beautiful
awesome
service.
day.
But if there was a conflict where hundreds of Black Black people and Jews were fighting somewhere in the United States, that would have been headline news. If Blacks and Jews were, in the streets fighting each other, that would have been news. A few news outlets I saw did report about Blacks and Jews coming together in unity and in peace. But this is why, again, what we're doing is so important, because we are not just talking about it like we're going to do tonight. We've actually been physically bringing groups together. Similarly, the stories of Blacks and Jews working together on an ongoing basis is also there on our website, and some of the other things we do in the community. So I wanted to share that with our participants, particularly those who perhaps were not with us at the last event that we had. Now, with that, let's go to the subject of tonight's talk. And hopefully, okay, is this displayed?
Yes.
So tonight we're really looking into how some progressives see Israeli policies towards the Palestinians as disruptive to progressive coalitions. So when we said, what is it that divides us most? If you speak to people honestly, a lot of my Jewish friends would say, I'm concerned about the appearance of the rise of anti-Semitism. And so this is what is bothering me. So at our first session, that's what we talked about. If you talk to a lot of Black progressives, liberals, activists, and this is kind of my perspective or my background as someone who's on the left and proudly so, within those circles, many individuals say we have questions about Israel, particularly its policies and treatments with regard to Palestinians. And this causes us to have questions and doubts about our Jewish allies and partners. Can we talk about these issues? So first session, we talked about perceptions of Black anti-Semitism and explored that. And so tonight, let's look at how the issues of Israel affects progressive movements. What is the problem? What is the problem? Well, first of all, it erodes trust. And without trust, people can't work together effectively. The kind of trust issues that come up are, do activists believe that our Jewish allies are biased in favor of Israel or prejudiced against Palestinians because they are Jewish? Trust issues from Jews sometimes who wonder, do Jewish allies suspect that criticism of Israel is an expression of anti-Semitism harbored by many activists within progressive movements, right? So Danny, are they raising these questions because they're actually concerned about Israel or concerned about the Palestinians, or is this just an attack on Israel because it's Jewish? And so I think these are concerns that people have on both sides as it relates to Israel and Jews. Furthermore, there is fear. People are afraid to discuss issues for fear that they will be labeled anti-Semitic, or if they're Jewish, that they may be labeled as being racist, particularly if they're trying to talk about these issues with African Americans. And so both sides have a lack of trust, and they're afraid to talk even more now than I would say ever. It's been that for several years, maybe even decades. Some people harken back to the 1960s. But certainly within in more recent times, people are afraid of being canceled for saying the wrong thing, being fired, repercussions that could happen. I would say even within our group, to be totally honest, I've had conversations with Eric and others about forums and programs that we might do. And I remember one speaking to an African-American gentleman from the Newark area, and we talked about these Black-Jewish alliances and things we could talk about. And I said, well, we could talk about the issue of Israel if this is a concern. And he immediately told me, I'm not going to talk about that. If you want to bring it up, you could bring it up, but I'm not going to say the word Israel, and the kind of fear, trepidation. And he's like willing to talk to me privately, but it's like, if we do this, I'm not going to even touch that issue. And so there is palpable fear. We see on our college campuses, and I'm talking about within recent weeks, the conflict in the University of California system of student organizations passing resolutions that your organization cannot invite speakers to campus who support the state of Israel or do not endorse certain rights for Palestinians. And this is a hot issue. I happen to be a college professor at Northampton Community College. And so this is an issue nationally, but especially on our college campuses. And it affects not only the African-American organizations, student organizations, or Hillel and Jewish organizations, but where other student organizations are being asked to take a position. Do you support Israel or do you support rights for the Palestinians? And so this is a tough issue. Also in unions, for those like the American Automakers Union, this supported the divestment issue. As this issue is being put before legislatures around the country, some of them proactively saying we will not support a ban or boycott or divestment from Israel. Others where legislatures are proposing that their cities, states, or organizations and corporations do so, whether you're talking about Walmart or whether you're talking about Ben & Jerry's ice cream, which happens to be Jewish owned, who's voluntarily boycotting Israel, and maybe even within your own synagogue. I know when I'm in comfortable settings where people feel free and safe to talk, and I want to make clear that this forum tonight is a safe space. By safe, I mean if you say the wrong thing, you will not be, criticized. That no one really knows how to talk about these things, what words you can say now. So people feel free to express yourself, safe space. If you say the wrong thing, accidentally offend anyone, we understand this is taking place in the context of conversation, not intentional stating of positions in that way. But even in synagogues, the issue of Israel has been more controversial within recent years than I can remember, and particularly within the conservative and reform movement since the re-election of Benjamin Netanyahu last month. And this has divided even Jews among themselves over Israel and their support for Israel in ways that it never has, at least not in my lifetime. I'm also concerned that the problem is that it provides another reason for people of Jewish descent not to identify with Judaism. Either they're ashamed of Israel if they disagree with his policies, or they don't want to be blamed for Israel. If they identify as being Jewish, that they have to explain, defend, justify the actions of Israel. And so they may just not even identify as being Jewish. And this is another problem in terms of the growth of Judaism, but we don't want to give people another reason not to identify with their Jewishness or to practice their Jewishness if it comes with more baggage and more problems. Again, often on campus, some students, try to defend Israel, others, just don't be a part of things, maybe not active in the Hillel if they don't agree with the policies of Israel, but believe the Jewish organization, that is their position. So are you then going to still be a part of organizations like Hillel, or would you still be active in your synagogue even if you have different views? And the last things are, I think, is corrosive to openness and honesty, because when people suppress their anger and their frustration, they don't want to say it, right? But they're feeling it. That is even worse. I mean, it's building up, people, this kind of anger and frustration. And lastly, that a united progressive movement is needed more now than ever to create positive change. So we can't really allow for this to continue, allow for it to get worse. This is a time where we need progressive alliances to be strong and work again. And so it is incumbent upon us to find ways to try to solve this problem as much as we can. Here are some examples in terms of why it's particularly difficult for Blacks and Jews. And I know we have a diverse group in our Diversity United, but I'm primarily speaking to African Americans and white American Jews. Although there may be other people involved in this, we welcome everyone, but particularly that part of the Black Jewish Alliance as it relates to Israel. And this has been a very difficult subject, particularly for African Americans to talk about openly with their white Jewish allies. If you think about people from Andrew Young, former mayor of Atlanta, the former aide to Martin Luther King, when he reached out to Yasser Arafat to try to broker a peace agreement long before Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton would eventually bring Arabs and Jews together at Camp David. He was roundly criticized for even reaching out and talking. Columnists like Lamont Hill was taken off of CNN for some of his comments critical of Israel. Activists like Angela Davis, Alice Walker, who I have up here on the screen, the author of The Color Purple, who refuses to allow her books to be translated into Hebrew because this is one of her way of protesting Israel. By the way, her daughter identifies as being Black and Jewish, and has written a whole book about, her Jewishness. And Alice Walker was, of course, married to a Jewish man, but she's taken that position and gotten a lot of criticism for it. During the Black Lives Matter movement and protests, I recall, because I was active in my area, of how this issue comes up even when talking about racism here in the United States. And our Jewish brothers and sisters who are involved in that struggle, and how the issue of Israel comes up. Even when we're not necessarily talking about Israel, but at rallies, signs that people hold, speeches that people make. And then again, people being questioned about their position on other issues. Similarly with the George Floyd matter, and individuals like Barack Obama. Many African Americans feel that during his 8 years of president, that he was disrespected by Netanyahu and Jewish organizations that had previously been fair and balanced between Democrats and Republicans, and not really wanting to side with any one particular party, became more overtly Republican in their orientation, and then split off groups like Dre Street that, more progressive, but that, charges of Obama being a Muslim and therefore not going to be fair to Israel, and criticism of his Iran deal, which protected Israel and allowed for inspections, that was, roundly criticized by Jews. And, that is something that really, frustrated a lot of African Americans. And this goes back even to Nelson Mandela, who is a hero among African Americans, and his concern about the treatment of Palestinians, as he voiced it, and Desmond Tutu before his death, being critical of Israel and in support of of, of human rights for Palestinians, getting some, criticism, but African Americans, roundly supporting them. And so if they look at people like this, if you say something critical of Israel, even if you're someone like Nelson Mandela or Barack Obama or Desmond Tutu, you could be subject for criticism. And so now very few people are. It also takes a different view when African Americans and Jews are in conversation like this, because people all over the world can debate the Arab-Israeli conflict, right? But what's different about this conversation when African Americans and Jews are involved, and this I think is something that a lot of my Jewish friends miss, is that African Americans often perceive the Arab-Israeli conflict, more particularly the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, as a struggle between white people oppressing people of color, right? Not everyone is an expert on Middle East history. And when you get into discussions and debates, I mean, people start debating, policies and, Balfour Declaration, the 68 line, the 57 agreement, and they could get into a lot of minutia, and people could debate issues and policies very extensively. But most people have a general perception. And for African Americans, they see it largely as white people oppressing people of color. And so a lot of their sympathies lie with people of color and the struggle of people of color around the world. They also see it kind of like as a modern example of European colonization, like colonization of Africa or colonization of the Americas. And so they see it in that guise, Europeans, although in this case talking about Jews, but they are going someplace and colonizing a country of people of color. And of course, there are frequent comparisons throughout to South Africa and apartheid. And sometimes Israel is even called an apartheid state. And that linkage in that connection. And so that really strikes a nerve among African Americans in ways that maybe doesn't affect other people when they talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and maybe more disinterested or unaffected, or they see it just as politics or as history. African Americans see it through this particular racial lens that I think we have to be aware of. At the end of my talk last month about Black anti-Semitism, we talked about perceptions of whiteness. Are Jews white? I mean, one of the things about this Arab-Israeli conflict, the Jews would say, we're not colonizing, we are not interlopers. This is our homeland, right? This is where we are from, not from Europe. We've lived in Europe 2,000 years, but we are returning home, right? This is our ancestral land. So we are not European, we are not white, to the extent that that's what whiteness means. And so you see, this is a kind of level underlying tension of race and politics. And if you recall, my whole view is why I don't think there's as much Black anti-Semitism as the media likes to portray, is because I see the Black Jewish dynamic as being largely racial and not about religion at all, not about the Jewishness of the people they're in conflict with, but about their whiteness, not their Jewishness. And so if there's no anti-Jewish animus, then it is not anti-Semitism, right? And so I think here again, how race plays out in these discussions and debates. And again, I'm sure this is something we're going to discuss and debate, and people will have their views on. For those of us who are progressives, and I assume people who come to this panel involved in this group are largely progressives, but we may have conservatives and other people, but particularly for us who want to see Blacks and Jews working in unison again. Sometimes for us, it creates what I call a Jewish moral dilemma, right? Because our instinct, and a lot of us express our Jewishness through our activism, right? That the first, what's most incumbent upon Jews, is the prophet Micah said, what does the Lord require of you? Right? Is it to eat kosher? Is it to go to service on Shabbat? Micah said, what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, love mercy, and to walk humbly before thy God. So for Jews who feel like doing justice is doing Jewishness, right? It is the most Jewish thing that a Jew can do. It is why we were chosen as a people to repair the world. And so for us, you know, this is our calling. This is what we do. And having to, you know, address these issues in a Jewish state is particularly troubling, right? So Jews instinctively are always on the side of the oppressed and always on the side of the downtrodden, whether they're Black or not. This is where, you know, Jews generally are. What are you talking about? Any struggle around the world, this is where our sympathies naturally lie. So this creates more of a dilemma when we talk about Israel. Now, one of the things that I think is encouraging, these are recent photographs that I have on the screen now that were taken in Israel over the last few weeks. The photograph on the left is a rally of thousands of people marching in Jerusalem. The photograph on the right shows, again, thousands of people filling the streets of Tel Aviv, right? These are the kind of protests that we would see before the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. And, you know, Jews filling the streets in protest. And what I think is encouraging or helpful for us, and I'm speaking, you know, to us as Jews, is if we were in Israel, if we actually lived in Israel, we would be more comfortable criticizing Israel, right? Like these people here, I mean, when thousands of Israelis march or protest, it is clear that they are protesting against the policies of Benjamin Netanyahu, right? No one necessarily questions whether they love Israel. These are people who choose to live in Israel, right? They won't necessarily have their Jewishness questioned because they criticize one party or another. Although this, I mean, what's ignited this recent bigger wave of protests is a kind of rightward shift of religious movements, the hard right religious movement in Israel, which might seek to marginalize Jews who are not as religious or observant as some Israeli Orthodox leaders think Israel should be. And so their Jewishness may come into question, and they're angry about that. But they can express that without the kind of fear that many of us have, that if we express criticism of Israel, people would think we hate Israel, or we hate Jews, or but if we were actually living in Israel, then we would probably be in those protests. We would be there in those marches. We would be carrying signs and flags, right? And the analogy that I would make is the way we as progressives criticize our government here in the United States, right? We do it as Americans because we love our country and want our country to be better, right? We don't like some of its leaders, And when we don't like those leaders, whether it's Trump or anybody else, we could be very vocal about it. We could be very vocal in our criticism of certain policies, particularly policies that are racist, and fighting for the poor, the homeless. We could launch criticisms of the United States government at home and its policies abroad, without feeling we're betraying our nationality as Americans, right? So that's what I want us to think about in terms of finding a way through this, right? What should I do? Can I, be critical, or should I be supportive of Israel? I would say one way of thinking about it: do what you would do if you were actually living in Israel. Whatever it is you will be doing, if you would be supporting Netanyahu, then support him here. If you would be criticizing him there, then criticize him here. To be morally consistent is one way to get you out of a moral dilemma. If you have set of morals that change according to the situation, then each situation you have to change your moral standards, and that could lead to hypocrisy, as one of the things that we're saying. Just keeping an eye on my time to make sure we have plenty of time to discuss this and other people to give their opinions. Again, I don't assume that we're going to solve the larger Arab-Israeli conflict. We're trying to solve the conflict here among ourselves so that Blacks and Jews and progressives can work together. When you look at those who have tried to explain and defend Israel's position, I don't think you can find a more outspoken advocate for the state of Israel than Professor Alan Dershowitz at Harvard Law School. About 10 years ago, he wrote a book called The Case for Israel, almost like as a legal brief, stating why he supports Israel and why other people should support Israel. And he goes through almost like in a very legalistic way, and he's a law professor, arguing a lot of points, a lot of the things showing complexity, showing that Israel's not always wrong, that anti-Semitism is real. And even though he's a staunch, supporter of Israel, he also thinks of himself as a progressive and believes in human rights. But even Alan Dershowitz supports a two-state solution. And he does not support Jewish settlements in the West Bank. So he's very careful in some of his arguments, talking about different things, about defending Israel and its right to exist. But that doesn't mean exist everywhere in the Middle East or in certain places. So you could have a nuanced position where you don't have to be either all in support of Israel or all against Israel. You could say, well, I'm against West Bank policy. I'm against policy of no return for Palestinians. I'm against specific policies, but I'm in supportive of other things that Israel does. So I think we need a little complexity, a little nuance in our positions. But I do think, which I'm going to share to you, and I wanted to quote him accurately. And then not only was I able to quote him, but then I actually found a video of him, which I think is problematic because, having written a very detailed legal case, a very technical and historical case, that he then says at a particular speech that he gave at Yale University, one of my alma maters, that Palestinians should just get over it. Right? So their issues, this. I mean, all throughout the book, it's very complicated and there are two sides, but then to acknowledge, well, there are certain injustices, certain wrongs that the Palestinians have experienced, perhaps at the hand of Israel. And even when those things are true, even when they exist, Palestinians should just get over it. So let me see. This is like a minute and a half.
There's one country in the world which decided to have a law of return. And it's certainly one country in the world whose citizens will murder 6 million because no state would expect them. And claim about it's reasonable is a reasonable claim. 800,000 Jews have a similar claim. And Egypt, over 50 David Jones have police. Pakistanis, Bangladeshis and Indians. But in every situation, the refugees have moved on. There is in life a statute of limitations. We're 50 years beyond 60 years beyond 1948. Yet, refugee camps. The Jews who survived the Holocaust got over it. They don't walk around with teams to their homes in Poland and in Lithuania and in Yemen. They live in the present and in the future. The time has come for the Palestinians.
I'm not saying this, I don't even want to say it. See the people on the Holocaust.
So, again, I think the reason I selected, this clip is to say you can get into a lot of complexity, you can get into a lot of detail, but what he says there in the end, that Palestinians just need to get over it, right? And for me, this really is very disturbing, particularly for a Jew, to say that, right? And where I cut it off, the person was asking the question, asked, have Jews gotten over the Holocaust? And Alan just, we have, but, it also begs the question, what is the it? Palestinians should get over it. What is it, right? And the analogies that he made to Jews and other groups who have suffered injustices throughout history, Jews lost their businesses, they lost their homes, they lost their land. And when Dershowitz says that this has happened to other groups throughout history as well, this is true. And so is he saying to the Palestinians, and now this has happened to you. You've lost your homes, your businesses, your land, and you just got to get over it, right? You can't be walking around with keys. This used to be my house. My family used to own this land, right? Just get over it. For us, whether you're religious or not, we just read the Torah, Sidra Mishpatim last week. We're in the book of Exodus at the time of this recording and the time of this meeting, where God tells the Jewish people, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, right? That rather than getting over it, meaning to forget it, you're always supposed to remember, zakur, right? Actually, the Torah says, lo tishkach, thou shalt not forget. And so we're supposed to empathize and remember what happened to us when we came out of Egypt and throughout all of Jewish history. And that should make us more sympathetic and empathetic to other people who have suffered loss. And so for Dershowitz to say, well, the Palestinians just have to get over it. They fought wars with Israel, they lost land, and now we just they just have to get over it. So that's, terribly, I think, problematic for us. And for many of us, we can't just get over it. We got to deal with this issue. First of all, it's also unlike the Holocaust and other atrocities that history refers to, this is not over yet. So once it's over, you can try to get over it, but it is not over. It's over for some, but you still have millions of Palestinians, and the fate of their land hasn't been decided. The fate of their citizenship hasn't been decided yet. So this is not something in the past that we can't change. This is something that is going on in the present that we can address and do something about. What we choose to do or fail to do will affect the future, or whether other people will be victims of some kind or not. So it's not in the past that can't be changed. We just have to get over it. These things are going on right now, even as we speak. And so now how do we deal with other progressives and groups and their approaches? and Eric and I, we talked about this in our private conversations, and we want to bring it to the group of how do progressives and Jews deal with groups like BDS. BDS is an acronym of a Palestinian founded organization called Boycott, Divest, and Sanctions. And this is what they are pushing as a global approach to dealing with the Palestinian-Israeli issue, and calling on countries, colleges, corporations to boycott Israel, to divest funds from Israel, and to hit Israel with international sanctions for its treatment of Palestinians. Israel's taken a strong stand against the BDS movement. Many city legislatures have passed legislation saying that such boycotts, divestments, or sanctions would be illegal, and actually making it illegal to boycott Israel or divest from Israel or sanctions about Israel. This has caused a divisive issue for progressive Jews, right? Where now, do you support Israel or do you support the Palestinians? And are you in favor of boycotts or not? Or do you support divestment or not? Are you against sanctions? And this puts Jews often in a very uncomfortable position. I think that one way for us to look at this, and this again, I'm going to throw out there for discussion, is we all have to draw a line somewhere, a moral line, a political line. For me, I think we should draw the line at violence, right? And people can disagree in different ways. You can protest in different ways, but once you hurt people and engage in acts of terrorism or destroying property, blowing up things, that's where I draw the line, right? In terms of, regardless of what your motives or how just you might feel it is, that you have to use nonviolent tactics. You have to use just means to achieve just ends, right? And this is really the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi. It was the philosophy, obviously, of Dr. Martin Luther King. And so that you have to adopt nonviolent tactics. And those nonviolent tactics could be effective. So it's not like you're doing nothing, right? But that could be another lecture to talk about what's called nonviolent direct action, Martin Luther King's term, or satyagraha, what Gandhi called soul force, right? But there are nonviolent ways of addressing grievances, right? So now the problem, though, with the BDS is if you rule out violence, which is my position and position of civil rights activists like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and others, then it seems you have to permit nonviolent means. If you can't use violence, and you can't boycott, and you can't divest, and you can't call for economic sanctions, then that seems to be limiting protesting entirely, right? I mean, what other methods of protest do you have, or can you have, if you want to protest an issue? Or if you rule that out, then the only thing left is violence, right? So I would say I don't know, to say, well, don't use violence and don't use nonviolent methods either. Would be kind of like, well, then just get over it. Don't protest, say anything at all, you know. But being consistent with that. This was a problem, and this is an issue that's gone back for many years. I remember late Columbia University professor, Palestinian scholar Edward Said, who often talked about resolving the Arab-Israeli conflict nonviolently, and then there was a photograph of him on the West Bank throwing a rock. And I remember the criticism of him. I thought you were committed to nonviolence. We thought you believed in, dialogue and discussion and debate and nonviolent means, and then you were throwing a rock. And he had to explain, I didn't throw a rock and hit anybody. I was throwing a rock in frustration. But still, we have to agree on certain parameters for us to work together. And I think one of those bases is nonviolence. If you also insist, then you can't protest and boycott and call for sanctions, then I think that that's problematic. Whether they actually happen or not, and this is why when you study Martin Luther King's teachings more deeply, why boycotts and divestment and sanctions were effective is they create dialogue and discussion. It brings attention to the issue. So when you say you want to boycott, what do you want to boycott? Why do you want to boycott that thing? And you have to explain. I want to call for what do you want to divest? Why do you want to divest from that company or that country, and for what reasons? Right? This calling for it, even calling for it creates the dialogue that you want. Whether it actually happens or not, now we have to discuss and debate. Why should we do this? Will it be effective? It calls attention. One of the criticisms that Martin Luther King initially got, oh, by the way, and I want to digress, and I keep looking over to my bookshelf, but in this audience, I'm sure many of you are familiar with his famous letter from the Birmingham jail. Martin Luther King's one of his most famous letters from the Birmingham jail. And the reason it's called Letter from the Birmingham jail, it is a response to the clergy and one rabbi who was criticizing the protests in Birmingham, which were nonviolent. But even he was being criticized for using nonviolent means while this was going on. Okay, I'm gonna end before 8 so that we could have at least a half hour more of open discussion, and I'm willing to stay longer if necessary, if people want to. But to avoid for us the charge of hypocrisy, and this is one of Professor Dershowitz's stronger points about criticism of Israel, is even when they're legitimate criticisms, why are you only criticizing Israel for those violations, right? And he makes this point over and over again, and others have as well. We talk about human rights violation, right, and bringing resolutions to the United Nations against Israel, right, and not bringing human rights violations about countries like Iran, right, or Saudi Arabia, where they chop reporters into small pieces, right, or what's going on in Afghanistan in terms of the treatment of women and human rights. So he argues this creates a double standard, that Israel is being held to a higher standard and Israel is being criticized more for its human rights violations than any other country in the world. And he argues this is creating a double standard. It also creates a kind of hypocrisy, double standard of Jews who have been so oppressed throughout their history, now in the position of oppressors. Right. So this creates a kind of apparent hypocrisy and mockery of Holocaust and anti-Semitism in terms of diminishes, I don't want to say the importance of it, but how the world sees it and how the world sees Jews today. And I see we have some questions already, so we're going to have a lively discussion. And I guess, Eric, you're going to take them in the order that the hands are coming up already. But how does this diminish, the Holocaust, or have people think of it only as like, well, it's to get sympathy, and it's because of the sympathy for what Europeans did to the Jews that the state of Israel was created, and or that charges of anti-Semitism are brought up as a defense and justification for what Israel is doing, right? Because of this anti-Semitism here or there, this is why we're doing what we're doing, or we can't be oppressors if we're also victims of things. So this, how anti-Semitism is brought into the equation comes up. So let me end with some solutions. Always like to end on a positive note. So solutions are, let us strive for moral consistency, whatever our position would be. So if you're a progressive Jew like myself, what would your position be if these events were taking place in any other country? If it weren't called Israel and the majority of the inhabitants or leaders weren't Jewish, if this same situation was taking place anywhere in South America or in Africa or in Asia or in Europe, what would your position be? And you figure that out for yourself. And whatever your conclusion is of what it would be like there, then apply that same standard to Israel. That would be an example of moral consistency. An excellent example of someone who's a great American who, to me, exemplifies moral consistency is basketball player Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who I think is still the greatest, but that's a different debate. We're not going to bring up LeBron, Eric. But what I like about Kareem is he's morally consistent, right? He has positions. He doesn't just speak up, when Donald Trump was saying he's calling for a ban on Muslims. Well, then you expect Muslims to be concerned and angry and speak out. But he doesn't just speak out when it's Muslims being attacked, but he spoke up very boldly when Jews were being attacked. And you don't often see Muslims defending Jews when Jews are being attacked. But Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is morally consistent. If it's wrong, it's wrong. If it's right, it's right. Right. And even if it means it's Black people engaging in anti-Semitic behavior, I'm not going to defend them just because I'm Black, right? Or I'm not going to not come to the defense because they're Jewish, right? And so he is an example, I think, of moral consistency. And again, as I said, laying as a foundation, nonviolent commitment that we can all agree on nonviolence. And in terms of optimism, that we don't have to feel we're betraying our values. I understand, things have gotten worse and changed within recent years, but according to a poll as late as 2017, conducted by J Street, 71% of Israelis support a two-state solution. 71%, 71%, only 29% oppose it. Even among religious Jews, that is the Orthodox, 64% said that they supported a two-state solution. Only 36% said that they were against it. So you could be for Israel and yet support, a two-state solution, and you would be among the vast majority of Israeli Jews, right? Whereas often American Jews sometimes and sadly feel that the only way to show their support for Israel is to support the policies of that government, and that if they didn't support it, that they would be less Jewish or less supportive. But as I said, in Israel, 71% do. And so the solution, again, is we laid out those things and a quest, not only just support for Israel, but more importantly than just support for Israel, a support for true Zionism. And this is where, my background as a rabbi that informs my Jewishness is most important. And what does Zionism actually mean, right? Zion is more than just having a political entity, a country, or a state. We have a country called Israel. We have a Jewish state. We do not yet have Zion, right? Zion is a spiritual concept. It is a divine concept of the chosen people creating a nation where justice and peace and fairness and equity would exist on the world. That is Zion. And it would, if we could create that in Israel, then it could be a model to the world. This is what the prophet Isaiah said, and the children of Israel shall be orderly goyim, a light unto the nations. We are supposed to show them how the people of the world can get along, to set that example. Jews were chosen to kun olam, to repair the world. And so I don't think we're holding Israel to a double standard or to a higher standard. we're holding Jews to a Jewish standard. And so, to compare, so, well, but in Iran, it's even worse. And in Syria, look what they do, and Egypt and Afghanistan. But Israel isn't one of those nations. We are Israel. We are Jews. Our calling and our purpose is to set a higher standard, the highest standard in the world of how people should be treated and how problems could be solved. And that's the kind of Israel that I want to see. I am a Zionist. I am a true Zionist. And I encourage us to be Zionists in that sense, because Israel must be an example to all nations. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I turn it over to Eric and Jeff.
So Len, Eric, there was echo.
We should be all right.
Am I
So
open?
Len, yes, Len, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. How do we respond to those religious Jews who tell us that God gave us the land of Israel all the way from the sea to the river, and that what people call the West Bank is actually part of the land that God gave us thousands of years ago? It's ours. It's nobody else's. Nobody else has a right to it. Now, the Israeli government seems to be acting upon that particular belief. How do we respond to that? I don't see any particular organized denial of that. It seems to be an accepted thing that God gave us. It's our land all the way to the river.
Right. And the
What do
river
we say?
Torah is referring to there is not the Jordan River, right? It says everything from the Nile to the Euphrates.
Ah.
So the geographic reference, the biblical, everything from the Nile to the Euphrates. So if you lay that over the map of the world today, is this what Israel is claiming it has a right to?
Oh.
Is that why Israel gave back the Golan Heights?
That obviously not only include the Golan Heights of Syria, Lebanon,
Okay.
Saudi Arabia.
So, this is
Jordan.
So you could have that debate, right? But the other thing, like I said, again, the Haftorah La Shabbat was from the book of Jeremiah, right? And Jeremiah is telling the Jewish people of his day that because of the injustice, and this is when we have a state, right? He said, this state will fall. God will cause it to collapse, right? Because of the injustice that he sees with his eyes, and, the bribery, the kings, the leaders, the priests, the adultery, the idolatry, and particularly the slavery, right? Because the Torah portion said, you're supposed to free the workers, the enslaved, every 7 years, and the year of Jubilee and return. And Jeremiah says, because, you free them and then re-enslave them, he predicts destruction on. So the state of Israel, in other words, how do you, if you're going to use theological terms and scriptural terms, that the land of Israel was given to the Jews on condition that we rule justly, that we create Zion. And all the Hebrew prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, are the Jeremiads, the Hebrew prophets are criticizing the Hebrew. If we don't get our act together, we're going to cause the destruction of our nation. And I would say the same thing then to a modern Israel, that we have a country. If we don't turn it into Zion, then it will be, punished by God. and we'll lose the moral authority that the Jewish people are supposed to have. Let me go to the chief rabbi because he knows more Torah than I have, and he might have something to add.
So thank you, Rabbi, for your presentation. Very much appreciated. One of the things that I noticed about the protesters, both in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, is that the optics were not saying sufficiently that the Ethiopian community, the Ethiopian Israelis, were not pictured in any of these protest movements. They did not expand them out so much so that we could see them. And then the other piece that I would say is, as a Jew of African descent, I feel hesitant to be critical of Israel and supportive at the same time, because there seems to be looking at the complexion of my skin seems to say that if I'm criticizing Israel for policies that the Israeli government institutes, that now how can I be critical and supportive? I just read recently where an Israeli official told the US ambassador to Israel to stay out of Israelis' business. And we're giving Israel billions of dollars in support, and they're being told to stay out. The US ambassador to Israel was told to stay out of Israel's business. Lastly, I want to just offer to you a piece that I got today from the Israeli government, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, from Jerusalem, dated the 19th February 2023. Dear leaders of Jewish communities and organizations. Let me put my glasses on so I'll be sure to not miss any words. About a month ago, I took office as Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Israel and a member of the government. I consider our total commitment to diaspora with the utmost importance. As the national home of the Jewish people, the State of Israel is committed not only to its citizens, but to every Jew in every corner of the world. You are our brothers and sisters, and nothing is more important than placing your concerns and reservations at the top of our agenda. During the first weeks of my mandate, I received messages from our brothers and sisters around the world, including messages of concern about fundamental issues that affect not only the state of Israel, but also the Jewish people, regarding the law of return, the law of conversion, and the Western Wall Compromise. We all share same basic principles: Jewish education, the preservation of the history of the people of Israel, and the realization of the vision of our freedom through the values of Zionism. Even in difficult times, when Jewish communities face such dire threats as rising anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, and growing hostility, they can always count on Israel's unwavering support. In a meeting with our senior leaders of American Jewry, I understand my absolute commitment to strengthening the bond between Israel and the diaspora. No matter where Jews live in the world, the state of Israel is your home. Israel is a thriving democracy, and any decisions that will be made will affect that fact. This year, Israel will celebrate 75 years of independence, and we will continue to strengthen our commitment and our ethical and moral ties with our Jewish brothers and sisters around the world. I have asked all of our heads of the diplomatic missions to place the ties between Israel and the diaspora at the forefront of their work and to ensure that you know that there is a place for you at our collective table. We will continue to work together with you to strengthen ties and create new opportunities and partnerships that contribute to Jewish unity. I welcome your ideas and initiatives to make our unbreakable bond even stronger. Yours sincerely, Eli Cohen, Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
All right. Well, thank you very much for sharing that letter with us, Rabbi. It is indeed important. Wow.
I'm hoping that what all that is written by the Minister of Foreign Affairs will be able to come to fruition. I just received this evening. Maybe they knew I was going to be on this call, but at any rate, I think it's very important that the state of Israel understands the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, and some of the difficulties that we are facing with some of the decisions that the current government has been laying out. We're in fact, as a Jew that has fully undergone all elements of conversion, would now be questioned as to their Jewishness. This sets a precedent that I believe is very, very dangerous for the state of Israel with respect to the Jews in the diaspora, particularly those who have, for whatever reason, converted to the Jewish faith. And I pray with all of my heart that the Foreign Affairs Minister, Eli Cohen, rises up to do all that he can within the Israeli government to stop some of the madness that is going on in the state of Israel today. Thank you so very much. Sorry to take up so much time.
Thank you. No. When I'm anxious to hear from other people and answer questions. And
So Rabbi Shlomo, I'm going to take the prerogative and call on myself.
okay.
So there's Israeli policy on the one hand, and there is how non-Jews deal with Jews in connection with Israel, or maybe using Israel as an excuse for actions. So last year, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was invited to speak at an event honoring Yitzhak Rabin. And here you've been talking about the importance of the two-state solution.
Right.
And she was criticized because he had blood on his hands. Well, people who have blood on their hands are the people who make peace. People who don't have blood on their hands have no reason to make peace. Yasser Arafat had blood on his hands. These two men made an attempt at making peace. She pulled out of that event. Unless maybe I'm looking for reasons, but it seems to me that there's a level of anti-Semitism there. Because we're not talking, we're saying that our ideal is to create peace through a two-state solution. And if we don't have a two-state solution, things are going to get worse. Here, she was invited to an event honoring one of the architects of trying to create this, and somehow there was a problem. The other is an event that happened in Chicago, and Rabbi Fune may know more about this. About 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, I guess before COVID, there's an annual gay rights or lesbian rights event called the Slut Walk. And there was a Jewish lesbian woman who came with a gay pride flag with a Star of David on it. It was not an Israeli flag. There was nothing about Israel involved. And she was told that she would have to leave unless she either had to put down the flag or had to leave, because it was making others feel uncomfortable. So Jews have to take their symbols away because now all of our symbols are looked at as being political.
Yeah, and even if it were a flag in support of Israel, right? Not just identification of Jewishness. So I think we on the left, we as progressives, have to be on our guard, always vigilant about real, true anti-Semites where they exist, and confront them. And to be able to try, if possible, to identify or differentiate better people who are true anti-Semites who hate Israel because it's Jewish, and people who have legitimate disagreements with the state of Israel on policy.
Well, the question that I have in either of these cases, was Israel the central focus or were Jews the central focus? It's not, it may not be about them hating Israel because it's Jewish, but I do not believe that anti-Zionism is necessarily anti-Semitic. However, I think anti-Zionism attracts anti-Semites. It attracts people who hate Jews.
Yeah, and like I said, I would use the real meaning of Zionism. I would rather say anti-Israel than anti-Zion, right? Because Israel isn't the Zion that we believe it could be yet. So Zionism doesn't just mean a Jewish state, right? I think as it relates to AOC, now it's interesting that you should say this, because if I could just take the screen again, if I still have it. If you look at our website, let me see if I could. The last time I saw her was on the bridge in Brooklyn. I thought it was well, I don't know if I could find it there. Oh, here we go. Okay, so here's AOC. Here's Rabbi Potasnik, the executive director of the New York Board of Rabbis, and myself on the bridge in Brooklyn protesting anti-Semitism.
But here she was going to honor Rabin. She was attacked for planning to go to that event and speak. So I wasn't talking about her. I was talking about the people who put pressure on her not to attend the event.
Yeah, so I see her like at, anti-Semitism rallies, criticizing anti-Semitism, marching with Jews against anti-Semitism, as we all should after these horrific acts, So, but now I do know that she's probably critical of Israel on certain policies. And if it is legitimate criticism, I think that's acceptable. We can, even among Jews, we disagree on these different things, but I think we don't want to label everyone an anti-Semite because they're critical of Israel.
Again, it was the people who put pressure on her. She was going there to honor somebody who gave up their life for peace between Israelis and Palestinians.
And see, when Yitzhak Rabin, I mean, we also have to remember that he wasn't assassinated by Muslims. He wasn't assassinated by Palestinians. He was assassinated by fellow Jews, Orthodox Jews, who believed their interpretation of Torah, that anyone who would give up Jewish land is worthy of death. And so even if you talk about a two-state solution and creating a place for Palestinians in that region, that they will kill you, or that they believe, you know, that they should kill any Jew who would do that. So, and these are the kind of people with concern that are surrounding themselves around Netanyahu now, that are closer to the government and their kind of religious zealotry that concerns us. And that's what a lot of the people who are protesting, it's not just about Palestinians, they're protesting the intolerance, as you talk about, LGBT issues in Israel, which Israel has been very progressive on, but now this new government and it's right with a shift, and they're concerned about those things. So there is space in which we can criticize Israel and not be worried that we're not loyal to Israel. The last time I was in Israel, about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, because of COVID, I was staying in Jerusalem at the home of my old roommate when I was a student at Tel Aviv University as an undergraduate. I was from Middlebury College, and they put me in the same dorm with a New York Jew. It was at Colby College at the time, and we were roommates at Tel Aviv University. Since then, he has made Aliyah. He's married a Sabra, an Israeli, and they live in Jerusalem. So when I came back to Israel, I was like, you got to come stay with us. I stay with them. And at the end of Shabbat, their routine is we do Havdalah and then we go protest. I was a little bit nervous because I had never protested Israel in the United States. I gone to like the Israeli embassy and protested in front of the Israeli embassy. Like, we're going over to Knesset. We do this every Shabbat. We have Havdalah and then we go protest. And that night, this is like 4 years ago, there were only a few people there, but they protest, right? And no one, I can't question his Jewishness because unlike me, I mean, he's made Aliyah. He's become an Israeli citizen. He's married an Israeli and they have Israeli children. And this is why I suggested for us as a solution, imagine if we lived in Israel. Then we would feel freer to speak our minds and our thoughts without this expectation that we have to be loyal to Israel. And so therefore we can't be critical, because Jews in Israel are very vocal and very critical of their own government.
Can I?
Jeff, can I say something to you?
Yes.
There is a mayoral candidate that's running for mayor in the city of Chicago. And he happened to not have supported something about either Iron Dome or some other defense mechanism that Congress approved for the state of Israel. And they tried to label this individual an anti-Semite. And he said, I'm not an anti-Semite. And then he went on to say, I visit a congregation very often. And the congregation happens to be on the southwest side of the city of Chicago. He was talking about our congregation. And someone in the media made it seem, because we were a Black congregation, that his supporting us didn't matter. Chicago has one of the highest murder rates in the nation. That's what he was addressing. I understand the issue about Iron Dome in Israel, but 99.9% of the South and West Siders of the city of Chicago have no idea about Iron Dome. And so now, why should Iron Dome play into Chicago politics? So these are the types of issues that individuals will co-opt and make something of individuals who are running for office on the local level to try to attach it to the state of Israel. It's wrong, unequivocally and absolutely wrong. This man is never said anything anti-Semitic. He supports Israel. He was a city council alderman. He was a county representative. He was a congressman. And so now he's running for mayor, and Israel cannot be infused in the politics of local governments in every city saying, oh, if you don't support Israel, something wrong with you. The people in the Chicago South Side, where I live, I don't know what they read about Israel. I don't know what they care about Israel. I care about Israel, but I don't ask them to care about Israel in the manner that I do. And so it's.
Are there any things written in the chat, Jeff?
Well, so Michael Einhorn wanted to say something before.
Okay, I just want to make sure, that
Yes.
everyone can express their views and we could have an open dialogue.
Michael?
Well, one of the ways we can have an informative discussion on the recent issue is to see what steps have been taken in the past 4 years that we think have moved peace along, and whether those steps in any way should inform our discussion, which up until this point I have not heard. But one of the great ways to make peace is to offer the other side something that they don't have that we have. The thing that we have and they don't is technology. We have technology, they have oil, and that's going to make a big difference. Now, in 1919, we know that a bunch of Israeli technologists, 30 of them, went over to Saudi Arabia, of all places, to meet with the Saudi Arabian government. These were not peacemakers, they were technologists. Because Saudi Arabia wants to start talking Turkey because they know they're running out of oil's going down the tubes, and they know they're running out of water. The advantage Israel has and the play that we can make with them is to every way assure our participation in its technological advance in any way, because all of this can benefit any surrounding nation, but in particular in the advance of water technology. And ways that American Jewish technologists or any technologist can do this is a way that will necessarily force other parties to the table because they need it. They can't play oil anymore, but they have to get those bits and bytes and software coming over their system because that's where the world is going.
Yeah,
That's why I think the way to any kind of solution goes with looking at what's been successful over the past four years, something that we never had before.
And there's some reason to be optimistic on that front because connections between Israel and other Arab nations have never been better. They're not great, but the number, particularly the most recent initiative, which gives some credit to Trump, called the Abraham Accords, is largely about economic development and trade with other Arab nations. Israel's peace agreements with Jordan, with Egypt, and with desalinization to be able to turn salt water into drinking water. And even its military cooperation with Saudi Arabia vis-a-vis Iran. So you have these signs of hope. But what concerns me is, does that mean merely that Arab nations, when it's in their economic or technological interests, right, abandon the Palestinian issue, right, and say, look, we've need Salinization. We're interested in technology. We're interested in trade. And we're no longer going to make that contingent upon coming up with some equitable solution for the Palestinian issue. You understand what I'm saying? That they
Yeah,
could just
and that's
go
exactly-
on and as one said, move on, get over it, and normalize relations with the Arab world without solving the Palestinian issue.
That's exactly what I want them to do.
You want them to do.
I want Israel and the Palestine, the United States, to work out solutions between themselves, and that solution will involve the exchange of technology. Israel needs to develop within the West Bank the factories and the data centers and the training to enable the Palestinian workforce to have the skills and the infrastructure to participate as a technological operator in that area. Much as in the same way now as Egypt, which has no oil,
Right.
has more coders than everybody else. Africa.
Perhaps the
Oh,
thing that
wait,
concerns
wait.
me with that even,
Wait, let me finish. And the same thing that many African countries now are developing codes and advancing. The problem is Israel holds that key. And whatever makes that key unlock and work is where I want everybody to go around, because I know that the West Bank will go along with it most when it's in their interest to do it.
yeah. And I guess, again, points Alan Dershowitz would quickly make is that Israel's always agreed to a two-state solution, right? In 48, under the British mandate, after 68, and it has been the Arab nations and Palestinians who have rejected every plan to create two states. And so Israel's merely waiting for a partner. And this is what Netanyahu would say, we want peace, but who can we make peace with? No Palestinian leaders willing to even accept that Israel has a right to exist. And so then there's nothing to talk about and nothing we can do until then. And I would be sympathetic to that argument, which is to say, until you have a partner for peace, you can't enter into a peace agreement. The problem is that in the meantime, right, Israel is building settlements in the West Bank, right?
I would agree that could be a problem.
So then if in the next generation, a new Palestinian leader comes up more like in the tradition of Gandhi or Martin Luther King, committed to nonviolence, willing to accept the existence of the state of Israel within secure borders, and then there won't be anything left of the West Bank in which to put a state, right? It'd be
I would agree the West Bank is a problem.
So I think we should just hold on to it until.
I would agree it's a problem.
Right.
Okay. That having been said, Israel can still go ahead, get on those planes, develop the technology, go down to Saudi Arabia, go down to all the other Arab countries, and whatever they do with the West Bank, and I hope it's just, they still can offer to those countries around them the one thing that they don't have now, which is the ability to compete on a technological sphere. And they're holding that trump card.
And I think Israel is doing that. I think there's doing that. But I think there will never be real peace or justice until you resolve the Palestinian issue. It remains a moral staining problem and a growing political problem. Although you could kind of move on without it, and other Arab nations are willing to move on. And as Joshua says, the Palestinians themselves, they just accept, that they lost and it's over and move on. But I don't know if it will change the Palestinians because, as Joshua points out, they already have a higher standard of living than Arabs in other countries, a higher level of education, better access to healthcare. In the occupied territories and living under Israel control than they would if they were independent people living in any Arab country in the Middle East. So for them, it's not, that my life would be better. It's about freedom and self-determination and justice as far as they see it. So the economic development by itself, I don't know if that would, because already, if you see my point, already they're better off than Arabs in Jordan or Syria or Egypt.
Yes.
Eric, you had something to say?
I have something to ask. Rabbi Shlomo,
Yes.
in a very fundamental way, you, your congregation, African-American Jews, describe to us what Israel means to you.
Well, we are supportive of Israel, particularly because we are Jews. And as some other people mentioned, this is special and sacred to us. Our view as Jews is that we are chosen to set an example for the rest of the world of how to live and how to behave. God gave us the Torah so we could have instructions and rules to help us and guide us to set better examples, right? And so this is why, the frustration with Israel, I think Israel needs to set an example of how a country deals with problems of equity and fairness, right? Now, in our private conversations, Eric, we've debated BDS, which hasn't come up tonight, but I think, I want to have an open, true dialogue about what to do and what kind of protests are acceptable and what's not acceptable. As Jeff said, I think we have to be on our guard about anti-Semitism and not allow that in, while still letting people express views. So what is acceptable forms of protest? What's not acceptable? Is BDS acceptable, not acceptable?
One can be anti-BDS and not believe that there should be laws stopping people from boycotting. One can believe that BDS
that's another evening, I think, Rabbi's right. But I asked Rabbi Shlomo, I asked you the question I asked because if you go back just to the Unity Shabbat, that was spectacular for all of us. I had a conversation with Prince and Princess Hezekiah on the way out, and she told me, "Man, my daughter is in Israel and she's having a baby. She's thinking about coming back." And I was saying it sounded. I felt like I was listening just to any other white Jewish fellow brethren from the suburbs. And I have my children over there. This is happening. That's happening. And it dawned on me. We all have the same issues. Black African-American Jews, I don't think, runs the gamut in terms of what Israel means to you as it does to white Jews. It's not like a separate category of feeling. That's sort of where my question was aimed.
I think for Black Jews, our Jewishness provides even more connection to Israel. We go to Israel. There are Israelite communities of different kinds in Israel. For African Americans who are not Jewish, they also have a close connection to Israel because they tend to be very religious, even in their Christian sense and tradition, right? In terms of a closeness with the Old Testament and affection for Jewish people in that sense, from a biblical sense. And some of them are aligned with the Republican right, ministers like Hagee and others who love Israel from a Christian, second coming of Jesus kind of thing. And so a lot of African-American Christians will support Israel for that reason in a kind of religious way. But the conflict isn't really at its essence religious. It isn't about who's the greatest prophet, Moses or Muhammad. It's about land. So if you boil it down to just like any other land dispute, right, in which the religions of the combatants are almost irrelevant, right? It's a land dispute, right? Except for African Americans, as I said in my presentation, who also see it in racial terms, which I don't know if other people look at it that way. But for African Americans who are not as informed as the chief rabbi said in the history and the details and policies and names, they see it black and white, right? It's another case of white people oppressing people of color. It is a case of colonization going on today, just like it's gone on, in the past. So I think for my white Jewish friends, if you understand that when you're in dialogue or debate with African Americans, right? Again, you'll see, first of all, that it's not really anti-Jewish, right? They don't really care or against your Jewishness, right? It's about kind of like Black people being oppressed, and especially when they're being oppressed by white people. So again, Alan Dershowitz would say, well, how could you talk about, what Israel's doing? Look at what's going on in many African nations, right? And Black people will go, yeah, but that's different. We can say about when they're being oppressed, but especially when they're being oppressed by white people, then that really, and so again, to the extent that Jews identify as white, then it puts them on the other side, as opposed to looking at it as an internal struggle among people who, interestingly enough, who are both Semitic, right? So Arabs are Semitic people. Jews are also Semitic people, right? So this is a internal Semitic conflict. When you talk about conflicts between Jews and Muslims, this is a conflict between two Semitic people. But often Jews are considered, thought of as white, and in this context, especially for African Americans.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. I think you muted yourself, Jeff.
Yes. Anybody else have something to add here? Any other questions, comments?
I thought I saw Len raising his hand briefly. Len, you out there?
There's a hand with a phone. I don't know who it is.
Oh,
It's me.
Eric?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Perhaps.
Just wanted to mention that I agree with the comments about the land dispute, and just wanted to add that I think it's also a land and water dispute. And, the importance of water resources in Middle Eastern politics, etc., is sort of a topic unto itself, and I don't want to delve into it, but I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
Well, Rabbi Shlomo,
Yes.
that's back to back toward the forces. What's the third one we have to look forward to?
That's a good question. And again, the fact that we've had this conversation tonight, and again, there's no blood on the floor, shows that we can talk about these things. And it doesn't have to be as divisive, and people don't have to be afraid to express themselves and share their views. And I think we also got a deeper understanding, I hope, right? I hope it was liberating, because to the extent that I know when I'm speaking to the choir, so I got a lot of progressives here. I hope this is liberating for us. And in a way, sometimes, how we could help our Black friends and white progressives who are Christian and critical of Israel, but afraid to say so. We could give them license, give them voice, right? Even the African-American gentleman I was talking about here, he wanted to say certain things, but he didn't want to say, it was like, you say it, right? So as a white Jew, those of you who are here, if you voice criticism of Israel, you give license and legitimacy to other people who wanted to do it, but were afraid to do it. The best example I can see of this is Tom Friedman in the New York Times. If he weren't Jewish and writing for the New York Times, he couldn't get away with it, right? But Tom Friedman could take, the critical positions that he does routinely in the New York Times. I mean, one editorial recently claiming that the Israel that we know and love doesn't exist anymore. I mean, you saw that headline, a few weeks ago. And he's very vocal and critical. And why could he say that? He can do that, one, because Tom Friedman is a Jew. Everyone knows he loves Israel. No one questions his Jewishness. And he's doing it from the New York Times, which is a Jewish-owned newspaper. If anybody else said the thing that Tom Friedman says, particularly if they were a Black person, but people would jump on them. So I think to a certain extent, we all have to be Tom Friedmans for the non-Jews that we are in solidarity with, right? That they want to say things, they don't feel comfortable saying it. So you know what? As a Jew, I'll say it if I believe it, right? But I'll say what other people are thinking. And then, you know, first of all, they know that not all Jews are in lockstep with Netanyahu, because they need to see that to not stereotype all Jews. Like I never hear Jews criticize him. That means they all agree with him. No, we don't. And they'll know that if they see more American Jews protesting, then they don't think we're all in support of Israel. And when you give voice to their feelings and thoughts and express it, I'm glad you said it, because I wanted to say it, but I was afraid if I said it, people will call me a racist, people will call me anti-Semite. But you can say it because you're white and Jewish. So that's another piece of advice I would give. And the same thing for our Black friends too. Sometimes there are white Jews present who want to say something about Black anti-Semitism or about Black leaders or something that bothers them, but they're afraid to say it because they're white. So if you also feel it, sense that and say and give voice for people who have feelings and are afraid to express it.
Sound advice.
And Eric, as you said, we need to have a topic for our next gathering, whenever that may be, maybe a month from now, if this is every month. But to keep up the good work and see how we could emulate this, that other communities around the country could be having these dialogues, having these unity services between Blacks and Jews, and actually rebuilding the Progressive Coalition.
I think your ability to present these topics will hopefully spread and we'll get a broader, a larger breadth of participants. I mean, we did pretty well today, as we did in January. But all I can say is my kudos to you, not just for your presentation, Rabbi, but for your desire and you know, commitment to trying to partner and moving these ideas forward. And this is it's a good forum for it. But you're really you and Chief Rabbi are perfect spokespeople. So I
We're
look
good
forward.
partners. We have a little coalition here. And
Yes.
this is the coalition that we want to exist all over the country. It was your
So
vision, your invitation, creating the
It's-
opportunity, bringing the people together.
Well, as you said, it's Torah's. That's what we demand from Israel as a nation, right? But it's been great, and you know, it's an ongoing dialogue, and you know, bring all kinds of different topics that you think are worthy. We'll put them out there. We'll continue to try to keep growing this. So thank you so much on behalf of everyone who attended. More power to you. It's interesting. It's really great to get to hear this perspective on issues that matter to us all. Rabbi Shlomo, your ability to do it in a non-incendiary way is a gift. So I feel blessed about that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed evening. Stay in touch. Look forward to the next email announcing our next forum.